All right, we are going to jump into chapter 4. And remember, this is the quick um, run through of the chapter. It's a review. We're not going to stop for the videos, and it's not going to take us half the time that it took us the first time we went through the chapter, because the thought here is you've already been through the chapter, you've already studied, and this is just your quick hit review towards the end. So now we're going to jump into chapter 4, engaging cloud vendors. So our book opens up talking about how we define a lot of things in business and financial terms. It also talks about how the first three chapters of the book were very, very heavily technical. And now um, we're getting really far away from the technical and we're really focusing on the business side of things. So, some of the discussion topics here is understanding business and financial concepts, finding and evaluating cloud vendors, and then choosing a migration approach. Okay, so when we're discussing understanding business and financial concepts, what's the main reasons companies move to the cloud? Well, we know the main reasons that companies do anything is either they're trying to be better, they're trying to be faster, they're trying to be faster to market, or they're trying to save money. There's several business reasons why companies do things, and of course, the one that's probably most important is the desire to save money. So we want to spend less on our hardware, we want to spend less on our software, and we want to spend less on on what it costs for people to be there and do the work. So when we're looking at this, we can look at table 4.1, comparing capital and operating expenditures. So we are going to get a little more technical whenever about our financial terms that we're learning in here, but it's very important for us to be able to speak in financial terms. Sometimes it's a little difficult starting out, but after a while you can pick up on these terms, and it's you can start learning how to talk the talk. So when we talk about the differences between capital expenditures and operating expenditures, it doesn't always come this isn't always true, but whenever I think of capital expenditures, I try to think of something you can touch, like a building, like a computer. And it's also when you spend money on an asset that you're going to have to write off over the next few years. So when we're looking at this, we say, what is it? So a capital expenditure, spending on assets such as building or equipment. And then operating expenditures is spending on ordinary business activities. So some examples here when we're talking about our capital expenditures, new servers, constructing a new server room, a private jet for the IT staff. Like I said, anything that you can run up and touch is a good example of a capital expenditure. Some example of operating expenditures, cloud services, building utilities, employee salaries. So is it an asset, a capital expenditure? Yes. Operating expenditures, is it an asset? No. And then when is it paid? So with capital, it's paid upfront in a lump sum. And that's where I was talking about how you can write that off over the next however many years. But with operating, it's recurring monthly or annual payments. And tax treatment deducts over the asset's lifespan. And then operating is deducted over the current tax year. So another set of terms that we need to learn here is variable cost and fixed cost. So variable cost will change depending on how much is produced or used. Fixed cost will not. So the example that a lot of people talk about in business schools, like in your home, your what you pay for your house. If you own the house and you're paying a mortgage, that is a fixed cost because you know it's going to be exactly this much month over month. But then your other utilities are things that you don't really know what it's going to be. Now you can, like, I know that I get my electric bill and I have it put on a plan where it guesses how much it's going to be so that I don't have a variable cost. That way I don't get a, huge electric bill right in the middle of summer. It levels it out across the year, but still your utilities, your water, your electricity, the things that come in and you pay every month, but you don't know what that's going to be is a variable cost. So some examples here of a variable cost: raw materials, employee salaries, and utilities. Fixed cost, they will change regardless of how much is produced. They will not change regardless of how much is produced. And this is like the lease paid for the building and your assembly line. Okay, so a few more words that we're going to talk about here, and we need to be able to speak to these and learn how to use these is on-prem. And so historically, um, on-prem is a variable cost, very little fixed cost, almost everything. So this is talking about if you have your data center, there's very few things that are variable cost. Everything was a fixed cost. You bought the machines, you paid for the building, and you put them in. But in the cloud, it switches. Our variable cost, almost everything that we do, including compute, storage, and licenses, and then with when we're in the cloud, our fixed costs are very few. Now there's some things that we can do, like we can pre-purchase compute in a reserved instance, and so we can get a little bit of a fixed cost. But really, when you're in the cloud, what you think of it is everything is variable, and you pay as you go. So that's the reason we moved there. So then a couple of concepts here are licensing costs. So there's a couple of different license models, including a pay per user, pay per device, pay per server, pay per network, bring your own license, a BYOL, and subscriptions. So a few different ways that we can license things. And then some of the concepts we want to talk about around human capital is like reducing the need for non prem staff, increase the need for cloud engineers, architects, and DevOps, increase time to market, um, managed services. Many companies have sprung for this. So, daily management and troubleshooting, performance testing, monitoring and reporting, and backup and recovery. Okay. So, then another way that we can save some money on our human capital is that we can authorize managed service providers. So we can also purchase professional services from our cloud vendors. And so a couple of different ways that you can look at here. And remember, we already did this when we went through the chapter the first time, and you can click on these. But we can take a look at the professional services for Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. So, a couple of different things whenever you're looking at the professional services. You can go directly to the cloud service provider. You can go to Amazon, you can go to Google, you can go to Microsoft and say, I need help and I want to hire some people to come in here and work. And I want actual Amazon resources, or I want Google resources, or I want Microsoft resources doing the work on my program. Well, that can be a little bit costly. So, a slightly less costly way that you could do this is take a look at these cloud service provider websites and find out who their partners are and go to their partners and pay a little bit less for resources. So again, the good thing about professional services is you don't have to pay somebody 40 hours. You might pay a little bit more to have them come in and do the work, but they're going to be able to do the work in fewer hours. You're not going to have to pay them benefits. You're not going to have to pay for them to be hired in, onboarded, and such. You're going to bring them in to do work that they're really, really good at, and then they're going to move off your project. So even though it might be a little bit, it may seem a little costly to use professional services, it actually is much, much cheaper for all those reasons I mentioned. They know what they're doing, they're going to do it quicker, and then they're going to be gone. All right. And then a little bit on finding and evaluating our cloud vendors. How do we decide what cloud service provider, what partner, what service? So the way we do this is the same way we would do any kind of project or program. We're going to gather the information. So, what kind of solution are we looking for? Do we want infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service? Do we want to use open source or proprietary technology? And then some other considerations. Some people want to pay because they don't want to be locked into a vendor. So that's called no vendor lock. What that means is you don't want to get tied in with one vendor, because then if they raise their prices, you have to keep going with that vendor. So you always want to be able to kind of stay agile and be able to switch back and forth. And then we also have greater flexibility in development, fast updates, support from a big company, and more features, um, and a clear SLA. So again, when I'm throwing these questions out there, there's not ever one answer. Every use case is different. And so, these are the questions that you start out and you're asking, and you're trying to dig down into what are we actually trying to accomplish, and what is the best way for us to meet our goals. All right, a few words that we need to learn in here, and they become very, very important. And lately, as I've moved over into a business unit and have kind of left the IT side, these have become real words that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. But in the industry, everybody knows what these are. So I'll just kind of go through here, and I'm going to give you the book example of what these are, and then I'll try to put in a little bit of real world examples of what these are. But RFI is a request for information, RFQ, request for quotation, and RFP is a request for proposal. So what it is you kind of think of it from left to right. This is a little less formal, a little bit high level, not knowing exactly what all the answers are. And they keep moving to the right, where you know a little bit more about the project, and it has to be a little more concrete. And then when you get over here to like RFP, means it's extremely concrete. You're writing out exactly what you're going to do, and there's some kind of an agreement in there. So let me just go through the book examples here. RFI, the purpose, it's information gathering. That's why it's request for information. So an example, doing a research on potential vendors, number of vendors, many. That means how many people are responding to this RFI? Many, many, many. And then next steps would be to take the next step to go into an RFQ or an RFP. Now let's look at the RFQ. So the purpose is pricing requests for a specific solution. So an RFQ, request for quotation, is saying you can have some assumptions in here, but tell me what it's going to cost. What are you going to bring to the table, and what is it going to cost? So when vendors respond to these, they're being a little more detailed here. So an example here, 500 terabyte of storage space is needed, number of vendors, no more than 3 or 5. Next steps, the winner gets the contract. Now we have an RFP. This is an in-depth project proposal. You're looking for an example, looking for a cloud solution to a broad business challenge. Number of vendors, no more than 3 to 5. Next step, finalize the statement of work with the winner. So from the RFQ and RFP, both of those can end in contracted work, and you take the document that you wrote. This is when you want to have really, really good assumptions in there to make sure that it is clear. And you come in and you say, okay, let's sit down, let's write out the statement of work, and we'll determine exactly what we're going to get paid to provide the solution that you've asked for. A few more words in here that we need to learn. Vocabulary around this is a statement of work. So this is after you've done whenever we're talking about taking the RFP and then defining out all the pieces, this is your statement of work. It provided by a potential vendor, and it details on what will be performed. And then you also have your service level agreements, and this is metrics for measuring success. For usually your SLAs are going to list out and say, this is what we can do. And then there's going to be, you want to point out the success factors, but you also want to point out what happens if what I say I can do, I can't get done. So there's almost all contracts have this in there. And so there's rewards for doing really good and punishments for not doing as good. That's what comes with your service level agreement. Some more vocab here. Proof of concept, or POC. What proof of concept is a small project to demonstrate feasibility of if something can actually be done. Then you have a proof of value, or POV, and it's was the POC feasible? And then you have a pilot, which is a small scale rollout of a solution. So let's look here, comparing the POC to the POV to the pilot and production environments. So we're going to have our proof of concept, our proof of value here. The goal, prove that a solution works or adds value in a test environment. Number of users, very small. Users roles, testing and feedback, support system, informal, development team, business impact of the issue, very, very low. But then a pilot, you've all heard of, like, it's kind of like a television show, a pilot. It's throw this out here. We think it's going to work, but let's measure it. Let's see if it's going to work. If we throw it out there and it doesn't, we know to pull it back. If we throw it out there and it works good, then we know we pick it up and we go forward with it. So the goal is to prove that a solution works in a production with low risk. Um, the number of users, less than 100 or 10% of the users. Users role, perform job tasks and provide feedback. Support system, formal, hypercare, development team and or help desk. And then the business impact, if there are issues, medium, because it's not full on, but it's something that you're doing, and so the business impact would be medium if something were to happen. And then production. So remember, we went proof of concept, proof of value, to pilot, to full on production. Production means that we throw it out there, we roll it in, and it becomes the way people do their work. That's what's meant by production. So the goal, enable the business to run. Number of users, all of them. You don't, when you're in production, you roll into the new system. You don't, everybody's all in. The role of the user is to perform their job task. The support system is very formal. This is where you have a help desk. People can call in and open up a ticket if there's anything that doesn't work. And then the business impact of the issues, extremely high. This would be a production outage if something were not to work. All right, and then we're moving in to negotiating contracts and billing. So we have a discussion around contracts, terms of service, privacy and security policies with our acceptable use policies, service level agreements, egress terms, and billing. So this is when we have gone full on, all in, negotiating our contracts and working on the system and working on exactly how it's going to work and what all the terms of service are and everything that we've done there. So for the CompTIA Cloud Essentials exam, you'll be expected to understand the following: contracts, billing, requests for information, RFPs, RFQs. They're not necessarily 100% on the exam objectives, but it's likely they'll appear in the exam itself, or statement of work, service level agreements, evaluations with pilots, proof of value, proof of concept, and success criteria, and then open source versus proprietary. And don't worry, we're going to go through the exam essentials at the end of the course. Don't worry about that. After you've made the decision to migrate to the cloud, now what? So what components, what workloads, what services, what's the migration plan, everything at once, storage first, entire applications, we'll use an integrator, we'll use professional services. So what we're saying here is there's a lot of decisions to be made even after you decide to pick up the project and move into the cloud. So when it's talking about what components, what workloads, what services, you're not going to just pick everything you have up and move it into the cloud. You're going to start small so that you can figure out what works with your company, see if you're going to run into any major issues. So you need to sit down and decide, okay, what are we actually moving over? And as I've mentioned to you before, a lot of times we start with our storage. Storage is the easiest thing to move into the cloud. And so a lot of times that's where we start, and then we'll eventually pick up workloads that we see, that we say, okay, this is something that we could actually move into the cloud. And then of course the services, that's when you're looking around at what the cloud service provider has to offer, and you're trying to decide what services you can pick up and what can you do to replace workloads that you're doing now. The important thing in that conversation is that you do not want to disrupt what business you have today, especially if your business is what brings in your money, it's what keeps your customers. You want to make sure that you make good decisions on what are we trying to pick up, what are we moving to the cloud, and why. Are we doing this to save money? Are we doing this to increase performance? Are we doing this to put the workloads closer to the customer? Lots and lots of answers, lots of reasons that we would make these decisions. And then, of course, the next question there, what is the migration plan? Everything at once. I would say, unless you are sitting on a project that there's a retirement of a building, retirement of a data center, there's really no reason that you would want to go everything at once unless you had to. And there are some times that you have to. So, but it would depend when you were doing your investigation of, do we really, really have to? And again, like I say, the only times I've ever run up into everything all at once is because people waited too late. They started the project because the data center is going to retire. And so they're losing a building and things have to go. Um, there, I said storage first. That's the one I always throw out first. It's the easiest thing for us to move, and it's usually a vast improvement. Um, and it's almost always cheaper because you don't have to buy a big, large disk. You only pay for what you use. So storage is usually one of the best things. And then entire applications are just part of the application. And then the last question on this page, will you use an integrator? Professional services. Unless you have really, really good, talented people in your organizations and ones that you know are going to stick with you, it's a really good idea to have an integrator. You want to bring somebody in that's bigger than you, who has done this before, to help you, because it's not an easy thing to do. So there are a lot of conversations. We could talk for hours about use cases and what are the things behind what we're trying to do and what are the reasons that we would make certain decisions. All right, and then here we have a list of steps for choosing a migration approach. And keep in mind, these aren't 100%, but it's a good list and it's a great place to get started. So we'll start with number one, catalog the data, applications, processes, or workloads to be migrated. Classify them by size and complexity. And then number two, prioritize the order in which these items will be migrated. Number three, define how much of the migration will be handled by the CSP or the MSP and how much will be handled by the internal staff. Processes and roles need to be clear to everyone. Number four, assign the right personnel to manage the migration. This is very key and one that sometimes can be a hard conversation to have, but um, companies want to use their people. And, if you can use your people, that is really good. But sometimes you run into an organization that says, "Oh, our guys are great. We'll use them." And then you start working with them and you realize right away they're not the greatest. They might be hardworking, but they don't know everything. And so it's, as much as we want to try to keep those people, sometimes you have to you have to have some hard conversations. And sometimes the existing staff is not the best staff to do that. So just something to keep in mind right there. And then we create the plan for migration, roadmap, and schedule. Extremely important. This is when we go back to the things we learned in the previous chapter. You want to set some baselines. You want to say, this is where we're going to be this far in the future. And that way, if you're on target, if you're off target. So, the main thing is that you have a plan, everyone's aware of what the plan is, and you work to try to get through to that plan. One of the worst mistakes you can make is just going off and saying, "Oh, we're just going to do everything we can," because you'll put things off, the team will put things off. People, it's just human nature. So it's important that you do have a plan and everybody's trying to follow the plan. Establish KPIs for the migration plan and schedule. So KPIs are key performance indicators. And again, this goes back to that conversation about um, making sure that you have a baseline, making sure that you've done all your work up front so that you know what you're aiming for. And you always have to be able to unobjectively see where you are. Number seven, develop a security plan for pre and post migration. Security plays a role in everything. So make sure that you're thinking with your security hat on all the way through. Make sure that you don't do anything wrong, open up vulnerabilities, or mess something up on as you're moving in. Number eight, communicate the migration plan to key stakeholders. Again, this goes back to not only does the team need to know, but your key stakeholders, the people who are paying for the project, they need to be able to see where you are and to make sure that they are feeling that they are getting what they wanted out of this program or not. And then number nine, schedule check ins and perform them with the migration execution team. That's just project management um, terms. You need to always have those check-ins and make sure that you're working towards the goal and that that you're um, working with the execution team to make sure that everything is going according to plan. And then finally, test the migration and fix issues as needed. Again, this is just your basic project management and migration steps, but you want to make sure that you have a point to where you're testing and you know if you can go forward with the way things are or if you need to stop. Okay, so there's a few other things that you have to keep an eye out for. Um, Complexity creep, application issues, security risk. So what this means, complexity creep. A lot of times you start a project and everybody starts to see how good things are, and then they try to throw in one or two things. And as somebody who's leading a program like this, you really have to be careful and make sure that you can let a few things in, especially if it's going to help everybody and if it's going to make your stakeholders drastically happier. But as soon as you open the door, people start rolling in and things kind of can spin out of control quickly. So really and truly watch complexity creep. As a matter of fact, I've grown accustomed to just saying no. But then one of the last big cloud migration projects I was working on, I said no, and then I had the stakeholders kind of call me and say, Jeff, can we please? We're squeezing in these other applications, and it happened to be kind of what we are talking about a few slides ago. It was a situation where they were getting pushed out of the data center, and so they needed to speed it up. So I went ahead and said, okay, but actually, the reason they were so appreciative of it, and here's a little trick that I will always share. If I would have just said yes, nobody would have really appreciated it. Nobody would have said, "Oh, that's great. This program is really going well. These guys are really moving forward." But since I said no, and it got the attention of a lot of higher ups. Then they call me and they're trying to smooth me, and they're trying to say, Jeff, we really, really need to get this in here. Is there any way we can? Well, then they all appreciated it. So anyway, just a little side trick there. Saying yes all the time is never going to make you popular when it comes to any kind of project um, management and leadership. But being very protective of your people will make your people appreciate it. They'll make your project team happier. And if the people come in and the leadership is saying, we really, really need to get this in here, it's always a good thing to have that work out. So, anyway, that's my little spill on complexity creep. And then, of course, application issues. As you're migrating to the cloud, you want to make sure that you're doing testing all the way in because if you're not, um, if you let bad things get in, then it causes a lot of frustration down the road, and people don't look at your project or even a cloud migration as a positive thing. For instance, I recently was working on a program. The We were gathering requirements to move some people to the cloud. Well, it turns out somebody else had moved this one group into the cloud, but they left them with about half their things not working. So their applications weren't working. They couldn't hook up to their printers. They couldn't hook up to plotters. And so when I first came into the project, the team was kind of yelling and saying, we're not happy because this migration's not going good. And the very first thing I did is I pulled them all together. I said, hey, what do you mean this migration isn't going good? We haven't migrated you. Oh, yes, you did. And I said, no. who did? And they gave me the names. And I said, okay, they're not part of the migration team. Why did you let them move you? And if you let them move you, where was the testing? What happened? When did you say it was okay? And by the time I got done with them, they realized that they had royally messed up. And they no longer looked at me and my team as the enemy. They looked at me and my team as the people that were going to fix all the problems that they were left with. So anyway, we started working with them and we got it turned around. But the example there is what would be the team that was there before us did a very, very poor job. And they left it and made this group despise the cloud and despise the cloud migration. But thank goodness, me and my team were able to come in. We fixed that and we fixed their perception, and it will be okay. But and then the last one there, security risk. Of course, you always have to be worried about security risk, um, and that's with any movement at all, any migration, any application efforts. You need to be watching for security issues because security issues is the fastest way to lose credibility. A lot of the work that I do is government work, and you don't ever want to have a security incident because, of course, that could end up being on the newspaper and make you and your team and your organization not look good. So, security is one of those things that you are always looking out for. All right, and then the last thing that we brought up here was our different migration strategies. And so every one of these are real strategies. You just need to decide which one makes the most sense. So you have your lift and shift. And so your lift and shift is um, where you pick up the application exactly the way it is, you move it out to the cloud exactly the way it is. And sometimes things get a little bit better because you move them to the cloud, but then sometimes things don't work as well and you need to work with them and make it work. But still, that is a strategy, and it's a fairly cheap strategy as far as the migration goes, but it can be kind of a costly one if anything goes wrong in that. And then the next strategy we have is rip and replace. And so what this is saying pick it up and update it, make it um, cloud ready, which means replace it with services, take all the processes, move them over, but use completely new tools and tool sets to make them work in the cloud. And then the next one here is hybrid and phased migrations. So, this is a hybrid between lift and shift and rip and replace. And then you also do this within a phase. So here are the phases. So some of this will look familiar to you because this is what we've been walking through since the last chapter. So one, we do our cloud assessments. And then two, we do a proof of concept, proof of value. And then in three, we do our data migration. Four, app migration. Five, cloud usage. Six, optimization. All right. So in this chapter, we learned about financial aspects of engaging a cloud provider, business aspects of vendor relations, and cloud migration approaches. The chapter started with description of various business and financial terms that you might hear when you're working with CSPs. These included capital and operating expenditures, variable and fixed cost, bring your own license and subscription license models, human capital, and professional services. And I like the way they say that there. These are financial terms. In some cases, this is just vocabulary, and it's to make sure that you're speaking the same language as your business is. Then next, we discuss finding and evaluating potential cloud vendors. The first thing to understand is if you need need an open source or proprietary cloud platform. Then you can send out requests for information, RFIs, which usually leads to either a request for quotation or a request for proposal, an RFQ and an RFP. The RFP usually includes a statement of work, the SOW, and performance metrics in the service level agreement, or the SLA. Suppliers can be evaluated by running projects such as proof of concepts or proof of values or a pilot. So be sure you specify success criteria for all of the evaluations. And once your evaluation is complete, you can move on to negotiating and signing the contract and clarifying the billing process. And then finally, we looked at cloud migration approaches. The two discrete approaches are lift and shift and rip and replace. And a combination of the two is a hybrid approach. Migrations aren't usually completed in one step. Such migrations are said to be phased migrations. Okay, let's jump into our exam essentials. And as a quick reminder, our exam essentials are um, like our flashcards. These are the things that we want to make sure that we understand, and and you can go through the exam essentials, and it gives you an opportunity to say to look at the ones and see which ones you understand, and then to know if there's anywhere else you need to focus. So I'm going to do a whole video on how this exam essentials. I don't know if you notice, I just jumped into a new slide deck, but I have all of these broken out into different sections. So here you come click on Chapter 4, and this is where we have all of our exam essentials. The reason I did this is so you'd have one place to look as I was talking about these being your flashcards. This way you can come in here and take a look and go through all of them and know where you need to spend more time studying. Know the difference between capital expenditures and operating expenditures. So, a capital expenditure is a one time expense generally used to acquire a fixed asset. For tax purposes, capital expenditures are depreciated over time. Operating expenditures are used to support the ongoing cost of conducting day to day business, such as salaries, utilities, office supplies, and research and development. Operating expenditures are accounted for in the current tax year. Understand the difference between variable cost and fixed cost. Variable cost change from month to month, year to year. Fixed cost does not change. So remember, like fixed cost is your mortgage. A variable cost are the utilities to your home. Understand the BYOL licensing model. The BYOL model gives users flexibility to use existing licenses they have already paid for. BYOL terms let licenses be redeployed from one device or user to another. This gives greater flexibility, lower cost, and better license management. Understand the subscription licensing model. Under the subscription licensing model, users essentially pay to lease the rights to use the software for a specified period of time, generally 1 year. This in contrast to the perpetual license, which grants the use of the lifetime of the app. Summarize the financial aspects of contracts and billing. The contracts is a legally binding document that outlines the roles and responsibilities of the cloud provider and the client. It should contain terms of service, privacy and security policies, acceptable use policy, service level agreement, egress terms. Billing will happen either automatically or when certain level of usage is obtained. Know how to request for information is used. So an RFQ, when seeking a cloud vendors, an RFI document is designed to collect written information about a CSP's abilities. It's the first formal request for information and usually followed by an RFP and RFQ. Understand what human capital is and the difference between training and professional development. So, human capital is knowledge, skills, experience, and experience possessed by the IT staff. Training is a short-term experience designed to teach skills specifically needed to perform a task. Professional development is a longer-term approach focused on employee growth. Know the business aspects of the four professional services. The four professional services you should be familiar with are TTM, skill availability, support, and managed services. Know what an SOW is? SOW is a statement of work. It's a document provided by a CSP that outlines specific work to be performed by them. Understand what an SLA is? SLA is usually associated with the statement of work. It provides the metrics for measuring the success of the statement of work. Understand how a pilot is used. A pilot is a small scale initial rollout of a project into the production environment. The goal is to test the solution among a small number of users to see whether it works in the production environment. Know the difference between a POC and a POV. Both POC and POV are deployed in a test environment, which is a small number of test users. A proof of concept is designed to prove that technology works. Proof of A value should tell you whether the test will deliver the value, such as cost savings or extra sales, that you expect it to. Understand the difference between open source and proprietary clouds. Open source means that software are usually free or cheaper and the code can be modified. Proprietary software has source code that cannot be modified except by the company that produced it. Open source clouds are generally less expensive, have less risk of vendor lock in, provide greater flexibility in development, and are faster to update and upgrade. Proprietary clouds offer the backing support of big company, more features in SLA. Know what a rip and replace migration is? A rip and replace. The old software is completely rebuilt as it's moved to the cloud. It can take longer and initially be more expensive, but it allows older apps to take full advantage of cloud features. Know what lift and shift migration is? Lift and shift, apps and data are simply moved from one location, such as on premise, to the cloud. They are comparatively fast and cheap. Older software that is not optimized for the cloud might not realize all of the efficiencies of the cloud migration, however. Understand what hybrid and phase migrations are. A hybrid migration is one that combines rip and replace or lift and shift, or one where some services stay on premise where others move to the cloud. Phase migration is one that takes place in steps over time, such as moving data in the first year and the application second year. All right, so now we're going to run through the written lab. Again, these are the ones that at first you may not get it, but it's a good one, and I think it's a little bit better than some of the multiple choice questions because it gives you an opportunity to really make sure that you do remember the material. So a blank expenditure for tax purposes will be depreciated over the lifespan of the asset. That is capital. A blank license allows holders to move software from on-premise device to the cloud. That's a BYOL or bring your own license. When referring to employees, blank is long-term educational process focused on how of long-term career goals. That's professional development. How fast an idea goes from the idea stage to being ready to sell is called what? Time to market or TTM. Hiring out cloud management performance testing is an example of what? Managed services. What is the name of the document that specifies metrics used to determine whether the CSP is delivering what they are supposed to? Service level agreement. After approving an RFI, you want a company to produce a more detailed description of how they would solve your problem. What should you request? Request for proposal or an RFP. What type of cloud evaluation is performed on a production environment? That would be a pilot. In a cloud contract, which section specifies how a company can get its data back if the agreement ends? Egress terms. And finally, which type of migration allows all applications to fully benefit from the cloud? Rip and replace.